This is my true story. I was a father who worked with both hands and a tired back to raise my son. I gave him everything: food, education, and a home he never had to earn. I thought I was building his future, but I was only building his pride. One night at his dinner table, in front of his wife, he said, "You are disgusting, father." The word didn't just sting, it stayed. I left that house silent, but not broken. What I did next made him remember who gave him everything. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And subscribe so my story can reach more people. I raised him with everything I had. From the day he was born, I worked without rest to keep him safe and fed. My hands were rough from years of labor, but I never complained. Every coin I earned went toward his comfort. He wore new clothes while I patched mine. He ate first, I ate last. I thought that was how love was shown, by giving, not keeping. I built his world piece by piece, one sacrifice at a time. I wanted him to have what I never did: security, education, pride. I wanted him to walk taller than I ever could. Every morning before sunrise, I went to work. Whether it rained or burned, I stood at job sites lifting, fixing, carrying. My back hurt, but my heart felt strong. Each paycheck became his future. I paid his school fees, bought his uniforms, covered his college rent. When he graduated, I cried, thinking I had done something good. I thought I had raised a man who would never forget where he came from. But success changes people faster than time does. The boy who once held my hand started looking at me like I was just another old man on the street. When he got his first job, I was proud. When he bought his first car, I smiled. When he brought home his wife, I welcomed her with warmth. I gave them furniture, paid for half their wedding, even helped with the deposit for their new house. It wasn't much, but it was all I could give. I wanted them to start strong, without worry. I thought my kindness would be remembered as love. Instead, it became a habit. Something expected, not appreciated. They never saw the tired eyes behind the smiles, the empty wallet behind the gifts. Years passed, and he grew comfortable in the life I built. He started talking like a man who had done it all himself. When friends visited, he spoke about his hard work, his struggles, his rise. I sat quietly, listening, proud yet hurt, because my name was never mentioned. My effort had become invisible. The same hands that had held him through sickness and fear were now just reminders of age. I thought maybe it was normal, that children move on and parents fade quietly into the background. I told myself to be proud anyway, but pride means nothing when respect is gone. I noticed how he stopped visiting as often. When he did, his tone changed. He looked at me like I was a guest, not a father. His wife smiled politely, but behind that smile was judgment. I still brought gifts when I came. Small things, fruits, groceries, things old men bring out of habit. Sometimes they were received with half-hearted thanks, sometimes not at all. I kept giving, because that's what I knew how to do. I didn't realize that giving without gratitude only feeds arrogance. One day, he asked me to co-sign a lease for their new house. They couldn't qualify alone, so he came to me, humble for a moment. I agreed without hesitation. I put my signature beside his, trusting him like I always had. It made me proud to see his family move into a better home. I thought maybe this was a new beginning. Maybe he remembered. But once the ink dried, the warmth vanished again. The visits stopped. The calls grew short. I had given him everything, even my name on paper, yet he acted like I was an inconvenience. I still kept quiet. I told myself he was busy, that life was heavy on him. I made excuses for his coldness. Parents do that. We carry the blame for our children's distance. I never asked for money. I never asked for time. I only wanted respect, a word, a look, a sign that he still saw me as the man who built his path. But kindness without boundaries becomes weakness, and I was too late to see that. What I thought was love had turned into his entitlement. The years I raised him had built a man who forgot the hands that raised him. It happened on an evening that began like any other. He had invited me to dinner at his home, something he rarely did. I dressed neatly, pressed my old shirt, polished my shoes, and carried a small gift, a simple box of sweets I bought with what I had left. I was proud to visit him. The house looked beautiful, the kind of place I once dreamed of building. I stood for a moment outside, looking at the windows glowing with light, thinking how far we had come. I smiled, believing the distance between us was finally over. When I stepped inside, his wife greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I ignored it. I was just happy to be there. The table was set with fine dishes, shining silverware, and soft music playing. I sat quietly, grateful to share a meal with my son again. For a moment, I saw the boy I raised sitting before me. Confident, successful, living the life I once wished for him. I thought maybe he had matured beyond the coldness I had seen before. I thought maybe we would talk like family again. Dinner began, and I felt nervous but happy. I didn't speak much, just listened, nodding at their stories about work, travel, and plans. I tried to hide my trembling hands. I wanted to be polite, to show I was proud, to show that an old man could still belong in his son's world. But while reaching for my bowl, my hand slipped. A bit of soup spilled onto the tablecloth. It wasn't much, just a drop, but the sound of it was louder than the music. The laughter stopped. He looked at me with eyes that had no warmth. His wife leaned back, smirking. I felt small in that moment, smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. The air grew heavy, the silence colder. He didn't need to raise his voice. The look alone was enough to cut through me. I could see the disgust in his expression, the shame he felt for having me there, the embarrassment of my presence in his perfect home. The sound of his voice came next, sharp, cruel, and unforgettable. It wasn't anger, it was humiliation disguised as disappointment. The word he used hit harder than any slap. It wasn't about the soup, the table, or the mess. It was about me. Every wrinkle on my face, every stain of age, every sacrifice, reduced to one word that burned through me. His wife laughed softly, trying to hide it, but I heard. That sound will never leave my mind. My hands shook as I wiped the table. I kept my head down, pretending it didn't hurt. The smell of food suddenly made me sick. The same hands that once fed him were now wiping his floor. Every memory of love we had built together disappeared in that single moment. I sat there for a few more minutes, but my heart wasn't in the room anymore. I was staring at him, but seeing a stranger. The meal continued without me. They talked over my silence, as if I wasn't there. I felt invisible in the house I helped him secure, in the comfort my name had co-signed. I realized then that I had given him too much power, the kind of power that makes a man forget his roots. The warmth I once gave him had turned into pride in him, and pride had turned into cruelty. I waited for the dinner to end, quietly pushing food around my plate. My appetite was gone. My heart had gone cold. When I finally stood to leave, neither of them moved. No goodbye, no gratitude, just eyes that told me I was no longer needed. I walked out without saying a word, carrying the weight of that moment like a stone on my back. That dinner broke something inside me that had survived every hardship before. I had lived through poverty, pain, and loneliness, but I had never known humiliation like that. It wasn't the soup that spilled, it was my dignity. The humiliation didn't end when I left the table. It began there. My hands were still shaking as I wiped the soup off the floor. His wife laughed under her breath, and he didn't stop her. The air in the room felt heavy, and every second stretched longer than the last. I wasn't just cleaning a spill. I was cleaning my own pride off his floor. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. Cold, judging, impatient. They looked at me as if I were a burden that overstayed its welcome. The sound of my hand moving across the cloth was louder than my heartbeat. I tried to stay calm, to keep my dignity, but inside, something cracked. The room was bright and perfect, yet I had never felt smaller. The man who once held my hand as a child now sat back in comfort, watching the father who built his life kneel on his floor. Every wrinkle on my face, every scar on my hands, every year of sacrifice, It all turned into shame in that single moment. The light above the table glared down like judgment itself. I could smell the food, rich and expensive, but I had no appetite left. The warmth that once lived between us was gone. It wasn't anger that filled the room. It was distance, the kind that can never be closed again. I finished wiping the floor, stood up slowly, and looked around. No one met my eyes. He turned his head away. His wife scrolled through her phone. The silence was worse than any insult. I wanted to speak, to ask why, to remind him who I was, but my voice stayed trapped behind my teeth. Words would have only made me smaller. So I stood there, breathing quietly, realizing this was no accident. This was a message that I no longer belonged in his world. I walked toward the door, but my legs felt heavy, almost unwilling to move. Each step carried the weight of decades. Every meal I skipped to feed him, every coin I saved for his future, every hour I spent working so he could rest. I opened the door, and the laughter behind me started again, quiet but sharp enough to follow me out. I closed it without turning around. Outside, the air was cold. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the ground. My reflection in the glass door looked like a ghost, a man who had lived for others and been erased by the same love he gave. As I walked down the street, the city lights blurred in my eyes, not from tears, but from exhaustion. I thought about every moment that led here, the kindness that was never returned, the sacrifices that were never remembered. I thought of the young version of me, working 2 jobs, believing love could be bought with effort. I had been wrong. Love that depends on usefulness is not love, it is convenience. When usefulness ends, so does respect. The humiliation that night didn't destroy me, it transformed me. The man who walked home was not the same one who left. Something inside me, something silent, patient, and cold, finally woke up. I realized that I had given him too much power over my peace. I had handed him the ability to make me feel worthless. That was the mistake I would never repeat. The laughter I heard that night became a seed in my chest, not of hate, but of clarity. I finally understood that kindness without limits turns into weakness. When I reached home, I sat on my old chair and stared at the wall. The house was quiet, but it felt like it was listening. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, letting the truth settle in. I wasn't broken. I was awake. The humiliation had stripped away the last layer of illusion. I had raised a man who forgot his father. But now, I was done teaching through love. The next lesson would come through consequence. I walked home alone that night under a sky that had no stars. The streets were empty, and the sound of my footsteps followed me like a shadow. The air was cold, but not as cold as what I felt inside. I didn't hurry. Every step was slow, heavy, and full of memory. I passed the bakery where I used to buy him his favorite bread as a boy. I passed the old school gate where I once stood waiting with a lunchbox in my hand. Every corner of the street carried pieces of his childhood, pieces of me. Now, all those places felt like strangers. The city had not changed. I had. The light that once guided me through hardship had gone dim. I looked at my hands under the streetlight. The same hands that once built his cradle now trembled with age. They had lifted bricks, held tools, cooked meals, wiped tears. They had worked for decades so he could live without worry. But now, they were empty. Not because I had nothing left to give, but because I finally understood the truth. Some people only hold your hand when it benefits them. Once it stops giving, they let go without looking back. The night around me was quiet, but my mind was loud. Every thought was a flash of memory. His first steps, his first words, the laughter that used to fill our home. I realized that the boy I raised was gone long before that dinner. When I reached my small gate, I paused. The old paint had peeled, the hinges creaked, but it still opened for me. My house, though modest, felt more honest than his mansion. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The silence wrapped around me like an old blanket, rough, familiar, real. I didn't turn on the light. I sat in the dark, letting the weight of the evening settle into my bones. I wasn't angry yet. anger burns fast and fades. This was something colder, a quiet, sharp understanding that love without respect dies slowly. I thought about how long I had carried his comfort on my shoulders. Every bill paid, every favor done, every chance given. When he needed a place to stay, I gave it. When he needed money, I found it. When he needed approval, I gave more than I should have. I believed that my patience was strength, but patience without limit is not strength, it is surrender. That night, I saw clearly what my years of giving had created, a man who mistook kindness for weakness. He had grown so used to taking that he believed it was his right. The walk home gave me time to think. I replayed his face when he called me that word. I saw the pride in his posture, the way his wife's eyes lit up when he mocked me. That wasn't just disrespect, it was satisfaction. He enjoyed watching me small. He enjoyed power, and I had given it to him. My silence, my sacrifices, my endless forgiveness, all of it had built the stage for his arrogance. That realization hurt more than the insult. I had raised the very person who thought my worth could be measured by money, status, or strength. As I sat on my old chair, I looked at the wall where our family photo once hung. His frame was still there, slightly tilted. I thought of taking it down but didn't. It was a reminder of what love without boundaries becomes. My house may have been empty, but at least it was mine. My peace had no price. His luxury had no soul. That night, I decided something quietly. I would never again beg for respect from someone who owed me everything. Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something had shifted forever. I had spent my life giving him warmth. Now, I would let him feel the cold. The quiet walk home was not just a journey through the city, it was a walk out of illusion. I left behind not just his house, but the old version of myself that thought love meant endless forgiveness. That night, I didn't lose a son. I found my backbone. I didn't sleep that night. The room was quiet, but my mind was awake, sharp, and still. I sat in my chair staring at the faint glow of the streetlight through the window. The house felt smaller than ever, yet the silence inside it had strength. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades. What I felt was deeper, a calm decision forming slowly, piece by piece. For years I had lived with patience as my shield. That night, I laid it down. There comes a time when silence must become action. I realized I didn't need to shout or argue to make my point. I just needed to remind him where his comfort came from. The air felt heavy, but it cleared something inside me. I looked around my home, at the faded walls, at the old wooden table, at the small cabinet where I kept my documents. I had built my life on honesty and hard work. Every paper in that drawer was proof. Bank slips, deeds, and agreements written with my name. My son's comfort, his house, his so-called success, all had my signature beneath them. The roof over his head existed because of my trust. I had co-signed his lease when no one else would. I had put my name beside his when the landlord needed security. He had forgotten that, but paper doesn't forget. I opened the drawer and pulled out the folder. It was old, but every document was still there, clean and valid. I ran my fingers across my name, the ink still dark after all these years. I thought about how many times he had come to me, asking for help with rent, with deposits, with credit. Each time, I said yes. Each time, I saved him from struggle. That signature had become his safety net. And that night, I realized it could also be his lesson. I sat there in the dim light, reading every clause of the agreement. The words were clear. Either party could request termination if the cosigner withdrew consent. It meant one thing. The comfort he built on my name could disappear with a single call. I smiled, not from joy, but from understanding. I didn't need revenge. I just needed balance. He had mocked the hand that lifted him. Now he would learn what that hand truly held. I thought of calling him that night, telling him what I planned to do. But I didn't. Words would give him warning. He would talk, beg, twist, or accuse, and I didn't want to hear any of it. I wanted silence to deliver the message, not my voice. The world had taught him to ignore my words. Now it would teach him to fear my actions. So I folded the documents neatly and placed them on the table beside the phone. Morning would come soon. The clock ticked slowly. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The streets were still, the sky gray, the air cool. For the first time in years, I felt in control, not over him, but over myself. I had spent too long forgiving disrespect, too long waiting for change that never came. That night, I learned that peace sometimes comes from closing doors, not keeping them open. When the sun finally rose, light filled the room. The documents glowed under it like quiet power. I realized something important. I didn't need to destroy him to teach him. I just needed to remove what he took for granted. Actions speak when words are ignored. He had spoken his insult in front of his wife. I would let life reply in front of both of them. I stood up, straightened my back, and placed my glasses on. I didn't feel weak anymore. I didn't feel old. I felt certain. The plan wasn't built on anger. It was built on truth. The truth that kindness without boundaries teaches others to forget gratitude. That morning, I made a choice that would not harm him, but would humble him. I picked up the phone and prepared to make one call that would turn silence into lesson. The morning light came through the curtains, soft and pale. I had not slept, but I didn't feel tired. The calm inside me was steady, almost peaceful. I walked to the table, looked at the papers one last time, and picked up the phone. My hands didn't shake. They were firm, the way they used to be when I built things with strength and purpose. I dialed the number written in the corner of the lease agreement, the landlord's office. The sound of the ringing echoed in the quiet room. Each ring felt like a heartbeat counting down to balance. When the call connected, I spoke clearly, without hesitation. My name still carried weight, and on that paper, it carried authority. The landlord recognized me right away. I told him my decision simply, without explanation or story. I said I wanted to withdraw my name from the agreement, effective immediately. I heard him pause, then shuffle through documents. When he spoke again, his tone changed. Respect replaced surprise. He confirmed that I had the right to end the contract because I was the co-signer. That single confirmation felt like the closing of a long, painful chapter. For years, I had been the backbone behind someone else's comfort. Now, I was standing up straight again. He explained that a notice would be sent within the day. It would reach the tenant, my son, and inform him that his lease was no longer valid. I thanked him quietly and hung up. The phone clicked and silence filled the room again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was lighter. It carried relief instead of pain. I looked at the phone for a long moment, realizing that sometimes power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from knowing when to stop giving. I folded the papers neatly and put them back in the drawer. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel revenge. I felt justice, the kind that doesn't destroy. It teaches. For too long, I had been the man who absorbed pain and turned it into patience. That morning, I finally turned patience into action. I knew he would find out soon. I knew he would call, confused, angry, maybe even scared. But I wouldn't answer. Some lessons need silence to echo. I made myself breakfast, just bread and tea, and ate it slowly. The food tasted different. It wasn't the taste of joy or sadness. It was the taste of freedom. My life had been chained to guilt for years, tied to the belief that a good father never stops helping. But help given without respect turns into self-destruction. That morning, I broke that chain. I looked around my small home, the peeling paint, the old furniture, the quiet corners, and it felt like mine again. Every inch of it carried honesty. There was no arrogance here, no judgment, no humiliation, just peace. I walked outside after breakfast. The sun had risen higher now, bright but calm. The air was fresh, the sky clear. I could hear distant sounds of the city, horns, footsteps, voices, but none of it disturbed me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's life. I felt present in my own. I sat on the small bench near my gate, the same bench where I used to rest after long workdays. I watched the morning unfold. Somewhere in another part of the city, my phone call was already changing things. A letter would be printed, an envelope sealed, a delivery prepared. The quiet machine of consequence had begun to move. I stayed outside until the sun warmed my shoulders. My thoughts were calm, my heart steady. I didn't hate him. Hate is loud and heavy. What I felt was silent and clear. The satisfaction of truth doing its quiet work. The call had not destroyed him, it had freed me. I had spent my life teaching him comfort. Now I would let the world teach him discomfort. It wasn't revenge, it was reflection. Every action has a shadow, and now he was about to meet his. The day passed slowly after the call, but my mind stayed quiet. There was no excitement, no rush, just a steady calm that filled the air like early morning fog. I sat outside my house with a cup of tea, watching the sunlight move across the ground. The birds sang, the wind moved softly through the trees, and everything around me felt still. I had done what needed to be done. There was no guilt in me, only a strange peace that comes when a man finally stops allowing disrespect to live under his roof, even if that roof once sheltered his own blood. The hours slipped by, but I didn't wait with impatience. I wasn't counting minutes or watching the clock. I had already spent too much of my life waiting for gratitude, for love, for calls that never came. This time, I was not waiting for anyone. I was simply letting truth travel at its own speed. I knew the letter would reach him soon. I knew confusion would come first, then anger, then fear. But none of that was my burden anymore. The wind outside whispered against the window, and I took a deep breath. It smelled like freedom. As the afternoon light dimmed, I thought about how simple the world can be when pride is removed. My house was small, my food was plain, but I owned everything in it. There was no voice mocking me here, no eyes rolling in disgust, no laughter that hid cruelty. Every corner held honesty. For years, I had wanted peace. I just didn't realize that peace sometimes requires letting go of what you built. My son had turned my kindness into a stage for his arrogance. I had stepped off that stage, and for the first time, he would have to stand without my shadow. The sky began to turn orange as the sun sank lower. I sat there watching the light fade, feeling the air cool around me. The calm before consequence has a strange beauty to it. The world feels quiet, but charged, like it knows something is about to happen. I didn't need to see his reaction to know how it would unfold. I could already imagine him coming home, opening the letter, reading the words he never expected to see. The confidence he carried would fall away piece by piece. The same roof he mocked me under would soon belong to no one. I finished my tea and looked up at the stars beginning to appear. Each one blinked in silence, distant but certain. I thought of them as witnesses, tiny lights in the dark sky watching the story come full circle. I didn't smile, but I felt lighter. Revenge feeds anger, but truth feeds closure. This wasn't revenge. It was reality returning to its rightful place. He had taken from me the respect a father deserves, and now the world was taking from him the comfort he didn't earn. Night came slowly. I went back inside, turned off the lights, and sat by the window. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I had made peace with what was coming. I knew that soon he would call, his voice loud, desperate, demanding answers. But I had already made up my mind not to answer. I had spent too many years listening to words that meant nothing. Now it was his turn to sit in silence and feel what silence does to a man who once laughed at another's pain. Outside, the moon rose bright and steady. It shone across the street, lighting everything in silver. I thought about how quiet justice can be. It doesn't roar, it doesn't scream. It arrives like moonlight, soft, patient, and impossible to stop. Somewhere, in that same night, his comfort began to shake. The papers I signed in the morning had already reached the hands that would deliver them. By sunrise, the truth would knock on his door. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The calm before his fall was not joy, but closure. I didn't want him to suffer, only to understand. Sometimes the only way to make a man see is to let him lose what he takes for granted. That night, I finally slept, knowing that the lesson was already on its way. By noon the next day, the calm I carried turned into quiet confirmation. The lesson had arrived at his door. The landlord's letter reached his hands while he was still full of pride, still living under the belief that he was untouchable. I imagined the moment clearly. The knock on the door, the paper handed over, the words printed in black ink. Lease terminated by co-signer's withdrawal. It was short, simple, and final. He would read it twice, thinking there must be a mistake. His wife would look over his shoulder, her smile fading for the first time. The house that had once made them proud would suddenly feel smaller, fragile, uncertain. They would try to call me immediately. I knew it before it happened. The phone would light up with his number again and again. I didn't move to answer it. Each ring was a reminder of every ignored call I had once made, every missed message, every forgotten visit, every quiet plea, now returned in the same silence. I let it ring until it stopped, and then I turned the phone face down. The sound of silence on his end would teach him more than my words ever could. I pictured him pacing across the floor, anger mixing with fear. His wife would ask questions, and he would have no answer. For the first time, the man who thought he controlled everything would have no control at all. The landlord would explain that his name was not enough to keep the house. My signature had carried the weight. Without it, the foundation of his comfort crumbled. The pride that once made him look down on me now served him the taste of helplessness. The phone rang again later that afternoon, then again in the evening. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear his excuses or his sudden politeness. Apologies made from fear are not apologies. They're survival. I didn't want his fear. I wanted his realization. I wanted him to understand that respect is not a decoration you put on when convenient. It's a foundation you build every day. Without it, everything falls apart, just like the roof he thought he owned. The sun outside was bright that day, but my home stayed cool and still. I sat in my chair, the same chair where I had planned everything, and listened to the world move on without noise. The sound of the wind against the window felt like a song of balance returning after years of imbalance. Justice doesn't always arrive with punishment. Sometimes it comes as reflection. He was now living the same reflection I had faced on that cold night after his insult. He would know the feeling of losing what you take for granted. I imagined the scene at his house. The landlord standing firm, his wife's voice shaking, his hands running through his hair in disbelief. He would try to explain, try to argue, but rules don't bend for pride. He would finally understand the value of the name he mocked, the name that once built his shelter. I had not taken away his home out of cruelty. I had only removed what was never truly his. He had mistaken comfort for ownership, kindness for weakness, and patience for permission. That day, all three illusions ended. When the last call came that evening, I didn't even look at the phone. I sat outside instead, letting the golden light of sunset fall across my hands. The same hands he once called old and useless now held peace. I had nothing left to prove. The world had done the talking for me. I didn't celebrate his loss. I simply accepted it as the balance of life, the moment when truth walks in, even if it's late. That night, my phone stayed silent. I knew what silence meant now. It meant understanding had begun. Somewhere across town, he was learning what it feels like to be powerless, to realize that pride can't keep a roof over your head. And as he sat surrounded by confusion and fear, I sat surrounded by peace. The day he found out wasn't a day of revenge. It was the day the wheel finally turned. By evening, the street outside his house was lined with boxes. The same furniture he once bragged about was now sitting under the open sky. His neighbors watched quietly as his pride crumbled in front of them. The man who once looked down on others now stood in the middle of the road, helpless, small, exposed. His wife's face carried no laughter this time. The arrogance that once filled their voices was gone, replaced by silence and embarrassment. The home they had built on borrowed strength was gone, and with it went the illusion that they were untouchable. Pride never survives when truth arrives. I didn't go there to see it happen. I didn't need to. I had already lived that moment in my mind long before. I knew how it would unfold, step by step. The landlord would arrive, firm but calm, handing over the final notice. The locks would be changed, the agreement void, the space no longer theirs. My son's face would lose its color. The same hands that once pointed at me in disgust would now tremble trying to gather the pieces of his life. He would feel the weight of powerlessness, the same weight he once placed on me. When the call came again that night, I didn't pick it up. I didn't block his number either. I just let it ring. Every unanswered call was a reflection of the nights I waited for him to remember me, the nights I sat alone thinking he might visit. He never did. So now, the silence he heard on his end was not revenge. It was balance. Some lessons don't need words. They just need time and consequence. The world has a way of teaching respect to those who forget it. It doesn't use anger. It uses loss. My son had mocked the man who gave him everything. Now he stood on the street, realizing that everything can disappear when you forget gratitude. His wife would ask questions he couldn't answer. His neighbors would whisper. His pride would crack. Every glance from others would sting. Every box on the ground would remind him that respect isn't optional. It's earned. I sat at home that night, the window open, the wind cool against my face. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just breathed evenly, knowing the world had corrected itself. I thought about how easily he could have avoided all of this. One kind word, one act of humility, one moment of care. That's all it would have taken. But arrogance blinds people. He thought kindness was endless, thought patience was weakness, thought a father's forgiveness would never run out. That night, he learned otherwise. The lesson wasn't about losing a house. It was about losing comfort built on disrespect. Money can buy a place to live, but not a place to belong. For the first time, he felt what it meant to stand without a safety net. I didn't want him homeless. I wanted him human again. I wanted him to remember how to feel small, not in shame, but in humility. Sometimes the only way to rebuild character is to strip away everything false that hides it. Days later, I heard he had found a small apartment far from that neighborhood. No luxury, no servants, no pride. Just walls, a roof, and space for thought. That was good. Silence has a way of shaping people when words can't. I hoped he was thinking, not about revenge, not about money, but about meaning. I hoped he was remembering the nights he laughed while I worked, the words he used when he forgot who raised him, the face of the man he once called father. The world doesn't forget. It waits. And when it decides the time has come, it delivers lessons through the same roads we walk. He learned his lesson not because I wanted him to suffer, but because he needed to understand the cost of pride. I had been humiliated once, but now I stood free. The man who once called me disgusting now tasted his own words. The echo of that night at his dinner table would follow him for years. Not as punishment, but as truth. He called me disgusting once. Now he lives with the taste of those words every day. What he lost wasn't just a house. It was the illusion that love comes without effort. I didn't shout. I didn't hit back. I simply removed the ground he stood on, the one I had built for him with years of sacrifice. He learned finally that when a man forgets the hand that fed him, life has a way of reminding him who kept him standing. I didn't want revenge. I wanted silence to teach what my words never could. That silence became my justice. I still live in the same small home. It's quiet, simple, and full of memories that no insult can erase. The chair by the window still holds my shape. The kettle still whistles in the morning, and peace still fills the air. I don't think about what he lost. I think about what I regained: dignity. I spent a lifetime being a father, but I had forgotten how to be myself. That night when he humiliated me, I didn't just lose respect, I lost balance. When I ended his lease, I took that balance back. It wasn't cruelty, It was closure. Sometimes the hardest thing for a parent to learn is when to stop giving. Love makes you blind. Patience makes you quiet. But silence can also make you strong. I had always believed that a good father gives until his last breath. But giving without appreciation only feeds arrogance. True love requires limits, not to hurt, but to teach. I realized that the most powerful lessons are not taught through anger, but through consequence. And that was my final act of love, not for him, but for the truth. The world didn't stop turning after it all happened. The days stayed the same, the sky still opened each morning, and I still woke up to the same sounds outside my window. But inside me, everything was different. I no longer felt small. I no longer carried the weight of what I couldn't change. I had faced humiliation and turned it into clarity. Some nights I still think about that dinner, the sound of their laughter, the pain that followed. But now, it doesn't hurt. It reminds me how far I've come from that moment. It reminds me that peace often comes after pain. He learned too, slowly, through silence and loss, through cold nights and smaller walls. Life has a way of humbling those who forget gratitude. I didn't need to see it happen to know it did. The world always returns what you give, sometimes softly, sometimes harshly, but always in truth. He gave me shame. Life gave it back to him. I gave him comfort. Life took it away so he could learn what it means to earn. I didn't curse him. I simply let the world finish the sentence he started. Now when I sit by the window at night, the air feels lighter. The stars look brighter. The quiet doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels earned. I don't wait for his calls. I don't expect his apologies. I don't need them. The lesson has already been written into both our lives. He will never forget the day the landlord came, the day his pride fell, the day his father's silence spoke louder than any voice could. Final thought. He called me disgusting. But the only thing disgusting was how far pride made him fall. I didn't destroy him. I reminded him. A son should never forget the ground beneath his feet was once his father's shoulders. I carried him for years. When he spat down at me, I simply stepped aside, and that was enough to make him fall.